Liu returned early to catch a traitor, but as he reached for the door, a warm hand covered his mouth, and a voice like velvet anchored his soul. "Be quiet, sir. Let them show you who they really are." The penthouse of the Fiancee building smelled of expensive leather, ozone, and the metallic tang of unspoken threats. Liu adjusted his cufflinks, the gold catching the late afternoon sun. To the world, he was the Ice King of the Seoul underworld, a man whose nod could make fortunes and whose silence could end lives. But inside, Liu felt like a machine running on a low battery. His life was a series of transactions, including his upcoming marriage to Min-ah, a union designed for optics and bloodlines rather than warmth. Across the sprawling office, Carmen moved like a ghost. She was his shadow, his lead secretary, the woman who knew his coffee temperature, 82 degrees, and his mother's death anniversary, yet he rarely looked her in the eye. Carmen was used to being the backdrop. She wore her hair in a tight professional bun and kept her expressions as neutral as the beige walls of the lobby. She saw the way the other made men looked past her, but she didn't mind. In the silence of being ignored, she had learned to read people better than Liu ever could. She watched him now, the slight tremor in his hand as he signed a deportation order, the way he exhaled only when the door was locked. She felt a strange, aching pull in her chest, one she had suppressed for 3 years. To her, he wasn't a boss. He was a man drowning in a sea of sharks, and he didn't even know he was wet. "The car is ready, Mr. Liu," Carmen said softly, her voice the only thing in the room that didn't feel like a sharp edge. "The gala doesn't start for 3 hours. You have time to rest." Liu didn't look up. "I'm going home, Carmen. I want to surprise Min-ah. She's been distant lately." Carmen felt a prickle of intuition, the kind that had kept her alive in the roughest parts of the city before she found this job. She knew Min-ah's schedule. She knew the perfume that lingered in the hallway when Liu wasn't there. "Sir, perhaps you should call ahead," she suggested. "I don't need permission to enter my own house," Liu snapped, grabbing his coat. The elevator ride down to the private garage was a descent into a cold, heavy silence. Liu's jaw was set like granite, his eyes fixed on the shifting floor numbers. Beside him, Carmen held her tablet to her chest like a shield. She could smell the tension radiating off him, a mix of expensive sandalwood and the sharp, acidic scent of a man on the verge of a discovery he wasn't prepared for. When they arrived at the estate, the silence of the house was wrong. Usually the foyer echoed with the frantic activity of staff or the high-pitched chatter of Min-ah's social calls. Today, it was deathly still. The air felt thick, charged with the static electricity that precedes a lightning strike. Liu moved with the predatory grace of a man who had survived a dozen ambushes. He didn't drop his keys, he didn't make a sound. He headed straight for the grand staircase, his face a mask of simmering suspicion. Carmen followed 3 paces behind, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw it before he did, a man's silk tie discarded like a snake's shed skin on the 3rd step. As Liu reached the landing of the master suite, the muffled sound of laughter drifted through the heavy oak doors. Min-ah's laughter, breathless and intimate. Not the polite, rehearsed giggle she gave Liu, but something raw. Then a man's voice, deep and mocking. Liu's hand went to the small of his back, his fingers closing around the cold steel of his tucked-away firearm. His knuckles turned white. His eyes went dark, the pupils dilating with a lethal, focused rage. He reached for the handle, his intention clear. He was going to burn his world down. Suddenly, a warm, firm hand clamped over his wrist and another pressed firmly over his mouth. Liu froze. No one touched the Ice King. No one dared. But there was Carmen, her face inches from his. Her eyes weren't filled with the usual subservience. They were wide, blazing with a fierce, protective intelligence. She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear, her voice a ghost of a velvet thread. "Be quiet, sir," she whispered. the command startling him into stillness. Don't give them the satisfaction of your rage. Let them show you exactly who they are when they think you're not looking. See the truth before you act. Liu's chest heaved against her palm. For a heartbeat, he felt the hum of her pulse against his skin, a grounding rhythm in the middle of his chaos. Slowly, his hand relaxed away from the gun. The air in the hallway felt like it had been sucked out of a vacuum. Liu stood paralyzed, his body caught between the instinct to kill and the sudden grounding weight of Carmen's hand on his chest. Through the decor, the sounds of betrayal continued, vivid, careless, and mocking. Mina was laughing about a stiff, boring man who thinks money buys loyalty. Each word was a poisoned needle under Liu's skin. Carmen didn't let go. She steered him backward, away from the door, her touch firm and insistent. She didn't lead him to the stairs. She led him to the small, shadowed service alcove where she usually waited during his long meetings. It was cramped, smelling of laundry starch and tea, a world away from the gilded treachery of the master suite. Once inside the dim space, Liu slammed his fist into the wall. The dull thud echoed in the small room. "I will end them," he hissed, his voice a jagged edge of broken glass. "I will take everything they have and leave them in the gutter." And then what? Carmen's voice was steady, devoid of the fear he expected. "You kill a ghost, sir? Mina was never yours. You'd be going to prison for a woman who isn't worth a day of your life. Is that the legacy of the Shinsei family?" Liu turned on her, his eyes wild. He stepped into her personal space, looming over her, trying to use his height to intimidate the one person who had seen him at his weakest. "You think you know me? You're a secretary, Carmen. You're supposed to file my papers, not my soul." Carmen didn't flinch. She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting his own shattered image. "I'm the person who has watched you carry the weight of this empire alone for 3 years. I'm the one who sees the man behind the Ice King. If you walk back into that room now, you lose. If you walk out of this house with me, you win." The tension between them was a physical thing, a wire pulled until it hummed. Liu stared at her, his breathing heavy, noticing for the first time the strength in her jaw and the way she refused to blink. The rain began to lash against the windows of the black sedan as it sped away from the estate. Liu sat in the back, his silhouette swallowed by the gloom. He didn't look back at the house that had become a monument to his humiliation. Beside him, Carmen was typing rapidly on a secure laptop. She wasn't just a secretary anymore, she had transitioned into a tactical advisor. "Where are we going?" Liu asked, his voice hollow. "I can't go to the club. The elders will see the blood in the water. They'll smell the weakness." "We aren't going to the club, sir," Carmen replied, her fingers never stopping. "And we aren't going to your secondary penthouse. Mina knows all those codes. We're going to a safe house I registered in my own name 6 months ago. It's off the grid. No syndicate ties, no paper trail." Liu looked at her then, truly looked at her. "You've been preparing for this?" "I've been preparing for something," she said, finally closing the laptop. "The world you live in doesn't allow for happy accidents, Mr. Liu. It only allows for those who are prepared and those who are buried." The safe house was a modest apartment in a bustling, working-class district of Seoul. It was small, cramped, and smelled of jasmine, tea, and old books, a stark contrast to Liu's sterile luxury. For the first time in a decade, there were no bodyguards at the door. There was no one to perform for. As the door clicked shut, the adrenaline that had kept Liu upright began to evaporate, leaving behind a crushing exhaustion. He collapsed onto a small velvet sofa that looked like it had seen better days. The room felt tiny, forcing them into a proximity that made every breath audible. Carmen moved into the kitchenette, the mundane sounds of a kettle whistling and ceramic clinking filling the silence. She brought him a cup of tea, her fingers brushing his as she handed it over. The spark was electric, a sudden jolt of warmth that made Liu's hand tremble. "You should sleep," she said softly. "The war starts tomorrow. Tonight, you're just a man." "I don't know how to be just a man, Carmen," he whispered, looking up at her. The distance between them was barely an inch, and for the first time, the Ice King looked like he was melting. The apartment was lit only by the flickering amber glow of a street lamp outside. Liu sat on the floor, his back against the worn sofa, watching Carmen organize a small medical kit. The silence was no longer heavy, it was contemplative. He watched her movements, efficient, graceful, and strangely comforting. "Why do you have a safe house in your name, Carmen?" Liu asked, his voice low. "I pay you well, but not disappear off the grid well." Carmen paused, a roll of gauze in her hand. She sat down opposite him on the rug, the space between them shrinking. "My father was the driver for a family like yours back in Kenya. He saw a truth he wasn't supposed to see. One night, he didn't come home. My mother and I spent the next 10 years learning how to be invisible. I took this job because I wanted to be close to the power that took him, to understand it so it could never hurt me again." She reached out, her fingers hovering near a thin, jagged scar on Liu's forearm that peeked out from his rolled-up sleeve. "I saw this in your medical files. They said it was a training accident." Liu looked at the scar, then back at her. "My father gave me that when I was 12. He said a king must know the taste of his own blood so he never fears losing it. I've spent my whole life trying to be the man he wanted, a man who feels nothing." "But you do feel," Carmen whispered. She placed her hand over the scar, her skin a beautiful, deep contrast to his. "You feel everything. That's why you're so good at hiding it." The revelation was a gut punch. For years, Liu had been surrounded by sycophants who praised his cruelty. No one had ever reached into the dark and found the scared boy beneath. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. The scent of her, cocoa butter and rain, overwhelmed the lingering smell of his old life. In the quiet of that humble room, the Ice King didn't see a secretary. He saw a woman who had survived the same fires he had, a woman whose strength didn't come from a gun, but from her soul. The world outside the safe house ceased to exist. In this cramped kitchen, under the hum of a flickering fluorescent bulb, the Ice King and his ghost were simply Liu and Carmen. There was a strange, intoxicating peace in the mundane. Liu found himself watching Carmen chop vegetables for a simple stew, a task he hadn't seen a woman perform in years without the performance of a high-end chef. "Let me help," Liu said, his voice shedding its usual command for a genuine request. Carmen raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in her eyes. "Can the head of the Shinsai Syndicate handle a paring knife without starting a war?" "I've survived 3 assassination attempts this year, Carmen. I think I can handle a carrot." They stood side by side at the small counter, their shoulders brushed, a constant rhythmic contact that sent a slow burn through Liu's veins. For the first time, the touch wasn't about protection or secrets. It was about presence. They talked, not about spreadsheets or rivals, but about the small things. The music Carmen loved, old jazz that felt like honey. The way Liu had always dreamed of seeing the ocean without having to worry about who owned the docks. "You're different when you're not trying to be a mountain," Carmen said softly, turning to face him. Her face was flushed from the steam of the pot, her hair beginning to escape its tight bun. Liu reached out, his hand hesitating before he tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. "I've spent my life surrounded by gold and glass, but it was all cold. I didn't realize I was freezing to death until I stepped into this room with you." The air between them changed. The unexpected love was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. Liu leaned in, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. When their lips finally met, it wasn't a cinematic explosion. It was a quiet homecoming. It was the taste of jasmine and cocoa, A desperate, tender anchor in a world that was about to go to war. The peace was shattered by the vibrating hum of Liu's burner phone on the wooden table. The screen glowed with a single message. The board is meeting. Min-Ah's father is calling for a vote. Traitor. The warmth in Liu's eyes vanished, replaced by the familiar, deadening frost of the Ice King. He pulled away from Carmen, his movement sudden and jerky. The transition was so abrupt it felt like a physical blow. He began pacing the small kitchen, his mind already calculating casualties, bank accounts, and retaliations. "They're moving against me," Liu muttered, his voice devoid of the tenderness from moments ago. "They're using her infidelity to paint me as a weak leader who can't even control his own household." "We knew this would happen," Carmen said, stepping toward him, her hand outstretched. "We have the evidence of their plot. We go together, Liu. We show them. No." He turned on her, his face a mask of cold fury. "There is no we. You are my secretary, Carmen. You were a distraction in a moment of weakness. Look at this place." He gestured wildly at the humble apartment. "You think I can win a war from a kitchen that smells like stew? I need to go back. I need to be the monster they expect." Carmen froze, her hand dropping to her side. The word distraction cut deeper than any blade. "Is that all this was? A moment of weakness because you were hurt?" "I have to protect the syndicate," Liu lied, the words tasting like ash. He knew that if she stayed with him, she would be the first target. He had to push her away to make her hate him, so she would stay safe in her invisibility. "You've done your job. I'll have my accountants transfer a severance package to your offshore account. Don't contact me again." "You're a coward, Liu," Carmen said, her voice trembling but her gaze steady. "You're not protecting the syndicate. You're protecting yourself from being loved. You'd rather be a lonely king than a happy man." Liu didn't look back as he grabbed his coat and slammed the door. He left her standing in the center of the room, the scent of the home they had almost built together still hanging in the air. He was a king again, and he had never felt more like a corpse. Liu sat in the back of a different armored car, the neon lights of Seoul blurring into streaks of cold blue and predatory red. He was heading to the Fiancee headquarters, where the Board of Elders waited to strip him of his crown. His hand instinctively reached for the seat beside him, seeking the warmth of Carmen's presence only to find the cold, sterile leather. The silence was deafening. He had his power back, his gun, and his status. But he felt like a ghost, haunting his own life. He pulled out his phone and looked at the recording Carmen had helped him secure. Video of Min-Ah and the rival family head plotting his accidental demise. He had the weapon to win the war, but the victory felt hollow. He kept hearing her voice. "You'd rather be a lonely king than a happy man?" He realized then that for years he had survived by building walls, but Carmen had been the only one brave enough to climb them. By pushing her away to save her, he had merely condemned himself to the very prison his father had built for him. Suddenly the car jerked. A black SUV slammed into their side. Glass shattered. The world tilted. Liu's vision blurred as his driver screamed. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the heavy thud of boots on pavement. They weren't waiting for the board meeting, they were finishing him now. Pinned against the door, his blood dripping onto his white silk shirt, Liu didn't think about his bank accounts or the syndicate. He thought of the smell of jasmine tea. He thought of the way Carmen's hand felt on his scar. In the face of death, the Ice King finally broke. He didn't want to die for a throne. He wanted to live for a woman who truly saw him. With a surge of adrenaline, Liu kicked the door open, firing blindly into the smoke. He didn't fight with the cold precision of a boss. He fought with the desperation of a man who had something to lose. He realized he didn't need to be a monster to win. He needed to be a man worth saving. The boardroom was a tomb of silence as Liu walked in, his suit torn and his shoulder bandaged, but his gaze was more lethal than any bullet. He didn't say a word. He simply placed his laptop on the mahogany table and pressed play. The elders watched in grim silence as Minna's betrayal and the rival family's plot unfolded. By the time the screen went black, the coup was over. Minna was escorted out, her screams of protest echoing down the hall, but Liu didn't even look at her. "I'm done," Liu said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a mountain. "I've secured the borders, neutralized the threats, and cleared the debt. But I will not be your Ice King anymore. Find a new successor." He walked out of the Shinsei building for the last time, leaving behind the gold and the ghosts. He drove himself this time, weaving through the morning traffic of Seoul until he reached the modest apartment in the working-class district. Carmen was there, packing a single suitcase. She looked up as the door opened, her eyes red-rimmed but her expression guarded. When she saw his bandages and the raw honesty in his eyes, her breath hitched. "You're late for your severance transfer," she whispered, though her voice lacked its usual bite. Liu didn't stay by the door. He walked across the room and took the suitcase out of her hand, setting it on the floor. He took her hands in his thumbs tracing the knuckles he had grown to rely on. "I was a fool," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought protecting you meant leaving you in the dark. But the only place I'm safe, Carmen, is where you are. I don't want a kingdom. I want the tea, the jasmine, and the woman who told me to be quiet so I could finally hear my own heart." Carmen searched his face looking for the mask. She found only the man. A slow, beautiful smile broke across her face, and she pulled him into a kiss that tasted of second chances and a love that had finally found its time. "About time, Liu," she murmured against his lips. "I was starting to think I'd have to come back and save you again." Under the morning sun, the Ice King had finally melted, replaced by a man who was no longer invisible and a woman who was no longer just a shadow. They walked out together, not into the underworld, but into the light.